Welcome to another episode of Coffee Time. I'm your host and coffee drinking companion, Natalie of Natalie Christina Coaching. Coffee Time is a space where I invite you into the everyday, real talk conversations I'm having with the magical humans in my life. My sole aim, SOUL, is to create as genuine a connection as possible over this virtual platform, and I am so excited to be inviting you along for the ride. Together, we laugh, we rant, we introspect, all the good stuff. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right, just kidding. You are stuck with just me this morning. I had pre-recorded an episode with a friend, and so part of the process with this channel, which I figured I'd share a bit about today, is before I post any collaborative episodes, I do send the version one edited to the person who's coming on, just to make sure that they're comfortable with everything that came out, in case there's any little parts they want removed, etc., before posting. And in this instance, the guest I was going to have on shared that what they had talked about no longer felt aligned for them. And so they just really weren't comfortable sharing the content, which absolutely, I think it is really important to acknowledge that. There were some really great gems that came out in that conversation. So I will be coming back to you with my portion on another day. The other part of that is this week I have been super sick, so I am congested right now with my Phoebe Buffet sultry voice. And so I really just didn't have the time or energy to put into rush recording another episode that I had stockpiled, sending it to the person for them to have to review it on a rush, potentially making edits, all of that before posting today. So here we are. And I think this brings up a couple really important things that I want to dive into. I also, for the record, don't really know what I'm going to be talking about with you today, kind of just whatever's top of mind. And as you know, this channel is really an opportunity for me to do just that. It's a chance to dive into any topics that are coming up, in particular topics that maybe aren't directly or as explicitly directly related to the coaching I do as a relationship coach, as a mentor in that realm of romantic partnership. And it's also a chance to really hash out ideas that maybe aren't fully baked yet, and to get the ball rolling to open up that platform for discussion, so that we can maybe find something super awesome and powerful at the end, or even just to get the ball rolling, to get us thinking, so that in time we can start to discuss those things in a little more detail in a slightly different way. So the first thing that I think this whole experience today with this episode getting pulled and me being like, oh my God, what am I going to talk about, really brought up for me, was that topic of consent. And so I really do actively try to integrate that into everything I do as much as possible, and hold space for people to be able to express their level of consent. Um, and that goes back to the fact that consent can be a no. And that is absolutely okay. And it is actually really important, I think, that we acknowledge that consent can be a no, and celebrate in a sense that consent can be a no. I don't know if any of you have heard, but I've heard that phrase, consent is sexy. And while I absolutely understand the notion it is trying to convey, I also do think that putting that judgment on consent is problematic, especially if we're talking in terms of sexual uh, interaction. um, Saying consent is sexy, I think, implies that the person's consent level is going to be a yes, and having a partner explicitly opt into something as a yes is sexy. And granted, it might be a turn on, but then what about when they say no? Like, what about when your partner fully owns the fact that, like, no, this is not something I am comfortable for, and you get to witness them show up for that for the very first time, and how powerful that is for them? Why can't that be sexy? So I dial it back a bit. And it's not consent is sexy. It's not consent is good. It's not any of that. There's no value to judgment on consent. Consent just is. Consent is necessary. Maybe I'll put it that way. But also, consent can be a no. So we can consent out of something. And I think that is really important to recognize. Um, so yeah, step one. The next thing that this all brought up for me, that I think actually parallels in a way, which I will share with you. First time stopping for coffee, because this is coffee time after all. And this is what happens when I don't have a guest. I have to create my own natural coffee breaks. And yes, my mug has a fox. It's very cute. It was a birthday present from a friend a couple of years ago. And on the inside, it says, "Wherever you are, be all there." And I love that little reminder to be present. Um, so the next thing is, today I had this plan. It didn't go as I had thought it would. Go figure. My friend used to always say, if you want to make God laugh, make plans. And my rebuttal to that would always be, well, God is definitely laughing, and eventually I will be too, because I couldn't always see the humor in the moment, because I like control. I like to be organized. I like to know what is going to happen. But in this very human world, that is not always possible, and usually just not possible, even though I seem to think it might be at times. Maybe you can relate to that. I don't know. Um, so shit happened. And I had to figure out how to deal with it. And I think the further part to that people often say is, everything happens for a reason. And while I absolutely do think that in any given situation, we can create meaning, we can find room for growth and learning and exploration in a way that maybe we hadn't before, I do not believe that thing necessarily needed to happen at that time for that lesson to come about. Chances are that that lesson would have come in a month, a year, 10 years down the road. Actually, more likely, we've had a chance to learn it before and we just weren't ready. I think sometimes it just so happens that this thing happened now. This, in today's situation, of course, not a bad thing, but it just brought up this line of conversation. Something happens and we might be ready to learn the lesson that this situation can teach us. It doesn't mean this is the situation that needed to happen for us to learn that. And for me, that is actually really important to discern. Because when I start to say everything happens for a reason, I start to judge the state of affairs that I'm in. And for me, adding that "for a reason" is a way to create that sense of reassurance, create that sense of certainty, that sense of control in a world where really that's not at my hands. Um, and for me, it comes out as judging the state of affairs. And that just doesn't feel peaceful. And so, while for you, saying everything happens for a reason might serve you, and oh, that's hair. Um, and maybe you use those words in a way similar to how I'm explaining what I believe. Maybe you don't, and that's okay. If it serves you, keep it going. If it doesn't, there's chance to explore something different. And sometimes that exploring something different might just point back to where you were, and that is still growth. And so let's do it. Um, so yeah, I don't believe everything happens for a reason. I believe everything happens. And I think that when the shitty stuff happens or the things don't align, sometimes what that is just that's the human part of life. That's agency. And that is where, we pick up the reins and we do a thing. And sometimes it's not fully in line with our higher power's will. And when I say that, I mean unity. I don't believe in this man in the sky God, as some of you know. If you know me, I do not ascribe to purity culture. That's actually one of the things that I help support individuals and couples to unpack, is to move through the narrative of purity culture, through the good, bad, the predetermined, to find agency, to step into truth and re-articulate what that looks like for us right now, and also to recognize that that is fluid, and that's something that can transform and evolve over time, in different situations, in different contexts, as we grow and learn. Looking at that higher power part, for me, what that comes down to more so is stepping into that place of unity, showing up with humility, showing up for the state of affairs, whatever it might be, looking for an opportunity to be of service, to share my experience and be of service. Like, I truly believe that that is my sole purpose in this world, and that is really all I have. And that's all I can honestly give. And so if I'm looking for opportunity to do that, and I'm living in the opportunity to do that, that for me is higher power. That sort of melding, I don't know what word to use right now. I'm really tired of the like my purpose and actually acting in it. And then when those things come together, that space between them, when that gap is bridged through that action, aligned action, we'll say, that's God. In this circumstance today, of course, a little bit different. It wasn't something devastating that happened. It wasn't anything bad. what I truly believe it is a really amazing example of how our truth and our relationship with higher power, and what that space we're stepping into looks like, can change and does change, and maybe ought to change over time as we learn and grow along that continuum, and along our journey and experience and reform and rearticulate that relationship with higher power. And so then on my side of this situation that happened, that's where it gets into more of the, okay, this happened, my plans didn't quite work out. What do I do? Um, and yeah, some might say that maybe they weren't supposed to work out so that I would show up to you today and share about these things. Maybe. What I would say is that they didn't work out how I planned. And I found opportunity to exercise that muscle and get uncomfortable. And I had the tools I needed to move through the situation peacefully and find solution. I don't think this had to happen today for me to do that. It's just how it worked out. And so here I am. So what do I want to talk to you about today? Didn't really have a plan. I thought it might be kind of fun to dive into a little bit more about who I am, what I do, why I'm here holding this space. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And have my morning coffee. I was actually getting interviewed for a project by a former client yesterday, one of her school projects. And one of the questions really was about, what prompted my journey as a mentor. Coffee did not prompt it. Coffee is one of the things that keeps it going, for the record. Just kidding. I try not to rely on coffee. So with that, I should say there were a lot of kind of micro journeys that are very interwoven in my story that ultimately led to where I am today and exactly what I'm showing up for. A couple of those things, which I'll touch on, but were my type 1 diabetes diagnosis, getting sober, MS diagnosis. Really, like, everything in my life has moved me to this point because it's all part of my context of my journey. But those were kind of the three big things that did happen. And so thinking back, like, the first time that I really had a notion I was meant to show up for something different was when I was laying in the hospital with my first diagnosis, type 1 diabetic, in April of 2012. And I remember laying there, and at the time, I really did truly believe that I was destined for a life in the world of academia. And I was going to study philosophy and go through and get my doctorate and become a professor and all of these things. And I was laying there in the hospital bed, and I just had the most clear thought that at that point I had in I don't even know how long, that I am meant to do something different. And it was that feeling of, this right now needs to serve some other purpose. It can't just be that this shitty thing is happening. And so that goes back to this, everything happens for a reason. I don't think that happened for a reason. What I do believe is it was an opportunity to shift my perspective. And I think that my change in perspective, though it took a while after that point, it really did start in that moment of realizing, like, I'm not going to make it through life with this, bad choice of words, life-altering event if I can't turn it into something more purposeful. Because in that moment, my whole life changed. In that moment, my world became math and numbers and needles, and the way people perceived me was different. People thought that I had done this to myself, and that brought up a lot for me. And it was just, there was a lot. And that, I think, is once again one of those micro stories that I'll unpack a different day for you in more detail. But yeah, in that moment, I had that clear thought, and now it took years for me to do anything with it, for me to evidently do anything with it. But that's where it started. And I knew that I needed to use that experience to show up and share and help someone else, just like my friend in that situation did for me. I had a friend who was diabetic, and as soon as she found out I was in the hospital, she made the trip down. She stayed with me. She came and visited me pretty much every day that I was there. I was there for 3 days. And even afterwards, she helped me with grocery shopping. She helped me understand what was going on, explained everything about it. And having that support was instrumental in that journey. And honestly, I don't know what I would have done. There's like these little angels in my life. And as I'm talking about this now, I truly believe that she is one of them. And there's a reason she was there at that time to support me. and to share her experience, right? So then fast forward a little bit, the next spring, got sober, was really angry at the world. The fall of that year, so this all happened within about a year and a half, got my MS diagnosis. And I think that really reinforced this notion that I needed to share this experience to be of service. And that, like I've said a couple times today, like that is my purpose in life. Um, and so it started with a food blog. I started a food blog. I was doing recipe development. I was sharing a lot more about specifically the health diagnosis and coping day to day and what that looked like and that sort of thing. And then I got a full-time job and the blog fell off the board. I had not had a full-time 9 to 5 style. It was actually 8 to 4, I think, style job before. And it's a lot and it restructures your day. And I just didn't have the capacity and it was really my focus. And so blog went away. I let it go, stepped into this role. I was with that company for about 3 years, maybe 3.5, I think 3.5. And I do actually still work in that industry. That is something I share very openly about. Um, that's a caveat I'll get into in a second. So I work in group insurance. I'm up here in Canada. We have group benefits slightly different than in the States, or wherever you might be, it might be different. So I'm kind of an account manager in that position, not sales, more behind the scenes, supporting clients, partners, whatnot. And so I had that role for 3.5 years. And unfortunately, the office environment was becoming very unhealthy. And I truly believe that I did everything I could on my end to still show up for who I am, and maintain my integrity and to get humble, um, be of service in the situation, do everything I could to make it as peaceful as possible. And it was just not shifting in a way that was sustainable for me. And it got to the point where I recognized that, and it got to the point where I knew that I needed to change. So I ended up actually getting networked through my local coffee shop guy, with one of his friends who had previously worked in the industry. So I met on what felt kind of like a weird blind date, but was actually for networking for a job. And I told him that the way to know who I was, because we never seen each other, we never anything, and I didn't really want to send him a picture of myself, that felt bizarre, was that I would have an Isaac Asimov book on the table. And that is my favorite author. It's really like the only author that I read. I have a book sitting right here. This is the one I was reading recently. I'm not going to lie. There is a section in the book before, it's like an 8-book mini series of his books. A section in the book before this that talks about taxes and how they have something to do with like the fall of the Galactic Empire. I don't really know much about taxes. So I think I need to go back and reread that part to understand this book, because I got almost halfway through and I was just lost. So I'll be going back to that sometime this year. It'll happen. Just not right now. Not right now. So anyway, I told him I'd have this book on the table. We met up, we were talking, and I mentioned that I wanted to get into the underwriting side of things because, as you might know from seeing some of these videos or what I post or my podcast, I very much am of an analytic mind in a creative spiritual realm, and bridging that gap is important. And so for me, that analysis and also creating a sustainable job path for myself in my full-time job while trying to build a business was really important. And underwriting seemed the way to do that. So he was like, why don't you do tech underwriting? Because clearly you like AI, you like robots, that kind of thing. This would be a really great fit. Like, do something you're passionate about. And so I kind of thought about it and got some input from him. And then the conversation moved along and we were talking about wellness and sustainability and kind of what my blog had been before and all of that. And on the way home, that line that he mentioned kept ringing, that why don't you do what you're passionate about? And I kept fighting it, saying, well, I'm not passionate about robots. Like, I love these books. I really do. But it's not a passion. It's more of a hobby. Granted, they have some key points that bring up things I'm passionate about. I love that level of analysis and the thought patterns that they provoke. But the strict subject matter is not my passion. And then I started to think, well, that conversation we had near the end of our coffee, that's what I'm passionate about. And so at that point, one, I really amped up my job search because I knew I needed to get into a full-time job, where I was stable, but also where I really felt I was in an environment that fit me. And so with that, I needed to get super clear on like what I brought to an environment and what I needed from it. And so I was explicit. Like in my interviews, I was very explicit that I ask a lot of questions. I need someone who will promote my further learning. I like to dig deeper, and I need someone who's okay with that. And very blunt about it. Because if I was going to move, I wasn't going to move for the same thing all over again. And then on the other part of things, I decided I needed to figure out like what I was meant to do. So where I had really started with the recipe development, the food blog, that kind of thing, and the autoimmune perspective, um, led me to start looking into holistic nutrition. I thought, oh, maybe I want to go the holistic nutrition realm. I started looking into schools, what it would entail. Some of the basic principles taught at the schools were not things that I necessarily agreed with, and it just didn't quite sit right. And it took time. So that was around the spring. In a couple months, I got my full-time job, which I am now still at, and I do absolutely love it. It can be exhausting, but the environment is fantastic. I have an amazing manager. Honestly, all the people, and it's a bigger office, all the people at the office are just fantastic humans, and I look forward to going to work. So not complaining on that front. Um, And so with that move, that's when I decided, okay, you know what? I had so many ideas and so many experiences like diabetes, MS, getting sober, my journey with food, my journey with relationships, sex, whatever, all of these things. And I didn't know how to bring them into one spot to help support the person that I was meant to show up for. So I invested in a coach, someone who coached business, but also really coached that foundational aspect of getting clear on like, who am I meant to help? What does that person need to grow along their journey? And what do I need to hold myself accountable and keep myself engaged to help them get to that point? And so where that started was with just generally, really supporting people to move through chaos and find calm, move through that fear, the overwhelm, to find peace, um, and to equip themselves with those tools. And it took time for me to realize that the specific part of this that I was meant to help people with is romantic partnership. And all those other little things, right? And that's where I said like the little bits in my story with the health stuff, sobriety, etc. All of that, there's cat hair, comes into play with my coaching, absolutely. And it also means that I have these specific experiences to help someone who maybe is dating with chronic illness for the first time, right? And so different people will latch on to different parts of the story of the person they are meant to go to for support. And I think that's also why we need so many of us in this realm as coaches, as mentors, helping with these different things in different ways, because everyone has a different experience. And so, as much as we might have the same message, the context that got us there might be different. And the people we're here to serve need the intricacies of that context to help them relate in the way that will get them the results that they need. Um, and so, yeah, imposter syndrome comes up. It is a saturated industry, but I can always go back to I have an individual experience, and that individual experience is meant to help at least one person out there. And I believe that of everyone who is showing up in this industry. And there's probably more than one, right? There's probably like hundreds and thousands and whatever. It'll keep going. But even if it's just one, like that's everything. And we all have that one person. And I do believe that. And so, yeah, relationships. And so in the past little while, I've really just embraced that and gone for it. And that's what you have probably started to see me talking about more if you follow me on my Instagram, on my podcast, Living in Desire podcast, is talking about the interplay between sex and higher power and how that supports cultivating ignited, conscious, romantic partnership. And through that, I really help support the individuals and couples that I work with to bridge the gap between spiritual and analytic. So I don't know if you haven't seen episode 2 of this channel, I suggest you go back and watch it. It's one of my personal favorites with my best boo and maid of honor, Renita. And we really do analyze the semantics, the words within this industry, and how those impact our ability to grow along our journeys. And I think that foundational level of analysis is often overlooked. Often phrases, suggestions, I find, get oversimplified. And while it's important to make a concept graspable, it's also important not to dilute it so much that it conflates the message that's being conveyed. And so, with bridging that gap between spiritual and analytic and diving in, it's really about um, helping equip the individuals and couples I work with practical tools they can then use to access truth, to navigate the different situations like the ones that I did today, but more specifically within partnership, within their family unit, within the different relationships in their life in a way that supports coming back to and nurturing that romantic partnership so that they feel engaged, they feel inspired, they feel turned on by their romantic connection. Because I do believe that that is an integral part of creating a sustainable partnership long term. I also know that after a couple of years, it doesn't necessarily come as naturally. And so it might be something that does take work, or maybe not so much work, but takes intention. And that is what I am here to help people cultivate. Um, some particular passion points of mine, which you will see me talk about. And I would love, if anyone's watching this, if one of these stands out to you and you're like, yes, please, let's talk about that one more, drop a comment below, because I'm always looking for new ideas to come onto this show to talk about with people, or to go onto my podcast where I dive into some topics. More just me ranting at you for 20 minutes. But I try to make those really practical and actually give you solutions to start integrating to move through the thing that I'm talking about, in addition to sharing real life examples for myself so that maybe you don't have to repeat the things that I did as I was learning. So purity culture, that's a huge one, and really unpacking that narrative and how growing up in purity culture has framed our ideas of how we can access desire, when we're allowed, with who, in what circumstances, and unpacking that, understanding why we've held on to it, and then re-articulating it in a way that shows up for us where we're at right now. So just like I mentioned with my friend, and what felt aligned for them changed as of the release date of our episode, and so we pulled it. Our relationship with higher power, our relationship with romantic partnership, sex, whatever, those things change. Um, and so it's really figuring out like how to continually check in with and rearticulate that relationship, and also how to be okay with the fact that it evolves and it's not static. Because I think a lot of us growing up in purity culture, at least myself with that background, it is very static. It's very black and white, good, bad, positive, negative. And I don't believe that life operates in that dichotomy. And so how do we rearticulate it in a way that is more fluid and allows for a more honest experience as we go? Anxious attachment style. That is a big one for me. As some of you know, I've been in a long distance relationship now for 4 years, and I absolutely default to anxious attachment. And I remember when reading that book, Attached, I was all about it. And then someone pointed out, they're like, okay, but what are you going to do about it? Because the book, at least what I got from it, it told me what it was. It told me what to ask of other people. But the thing is, at the end of the day, I can't control those other people. And I know that. And so I need to figure out on my side, what can I do to heal and move through this and create security for myself? And so that has become a big passion point for me, because I know how transformative that shift was in my life, to realize that I can create that sense of security. And how do we do that? And then the third one that I absolutely love to go on about, which you will find out very quickly if you know me, is boundaries. And most recently, that has been a big topic with wedding planning. And in particular, probably something I'll share about down the road once we've felt through it more, how to navigate when your partner and you are at different points of understanding your boundaries, forming boundaries, communicating boundaries in a cohesive way. That has been huge for us. I'm kind of at the ultra boundaries end of the spectrum. My partner is very much more in the introductory phases of learning. And so we've had different reactions to circumstances that have come up, and to people who have brought things up along the way with planning the wedding. And it's been really interesting to watch it unfold, how we have moved through that in a way that allows for both of us to honor where we're at on our journey and still show up as a unified couple. And so that's something I'll definitely dive into more later on. And I think that's enough for today. My throat is really dry. I'll have to edit a bit of this, so I want to go do that now. So thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of Coffee Time, this solo episode of Coffee Time. I super appreciate it as always. I'm not that caffeinated, I'm caffeinated enough. Your host, Natalie Christina. If you're feeling the pull, I would really greatly appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, share with your friends. I'm always looking for new guests and really just appreciate your support in making this channel more accessible. It does take, shameless plug here, 100 followers to be able to customize my channel name. And I would really like to be able to do that because that would mean that people who want to seek out this material as they hear it be talked about, whatever, are more easily able to. And let's face it, that really weird combination of like numbers and letters is not that easy to remember if need be. So anyway, hit the subscribe button, leave any comments, feel free to DM me if you ever have any questions. And if you are feeling the pull to check out my side project, Living in Desire podcast, you can find me on Instagram at that handle or my own personal one. I am Natalie Christina, spelled with a K. So until next time, I'm your muchly caffeinated host, Natalie of Natalie Christina Coaching. And I'm wishing you the most wonderful day.